Hello, humans and robots. This is David Potter, and welcome to the first episode of Exponential Outlook, where I interview experts and thought leaders in exponential technologies like artificial intelligence, biotech, nanotech, robotics, and the Internet of Things. In this episode, I'm having a chat with Sam Greengard, the author of the upcoming book, The Internet of Things, from the MIT Press. Sam is an author and a writer. He writes articles for Baseline, CIO Insight, Channel Pro, and Wired, and he focuses mainly on business and technology. Sam, welcome to the Exponential Outlook podcast.
Hi.
You've written a book called The Internet of Things. Would you give us the basics of the Internet of Things?
Well, the Internet of Things is about connectivity. It's about connecting devices, things, and that can include digital devices like smartphones, computers, things like that, and also connecting physical objects. So one of the things that is happening is a lot of physical objects are being tagged, or sensors and other equipment are being put into machines and clothing and all sorts of things that allow connectivity at a far greater level than has ever been possible in the past.
According to a Stanford University study, there are expected to be almost 1 trillion sensors in the world around 2023. That sounds crazy.
I'm not sure, and I don't think anybody at this point really knows exactly what percentage or how many, but the numbers are going to be enormous because when you start connecting devices, you can start to gather information in a far deeper and broader way than is possible. For example, a lot of people misplace their keys. Now there are devices or little chips that you can put on your keychain or in your wallet, and it will actually locate where that wallet or keychain is at using your phone. If their phone isn't working, it can go through peer-to-peer networks. There's all sorts of things like that. I don't want to go off too far in that direction, but I think the thing that's interesting is when you start connecting devices and things, it could be just about anything you can think of. You start to be able to either locate it or gather more information about what is happening at that particular spot. So we're seeing the Internet of Things used in a lot of different ways across a lot of different industries, everything from agriculture to manufacturing to tracking foods through the supply chain, so that if something is not stored correctly, the temperature isn't correct, it can be identified immediately and pulled out, things like that.
Would the bulk of these sensors be for the manufacturing and business sector or for the common consumer?
I would say it's for both. We have the industrial internet, which is something that GE is touting, and they are already equipping engines and motors with equipment that can sense when it's going to fail at a much more accurate rate than has ever been possible in the past. So what that enables is optimizing maintenance, replacing engines before they break. That could even be jet aircraft, things like that. But also designing engines and motors and equipment far better than it's been possible to do. So we have that side of the equation. I mentioned the food tracking. I could give you dozens of other examples, but it's also big on the consumer side. I mean, a lot of people don't realize they're already using the Internet of Things today. I have a Fitbit wristband on my wrist. Most of us have Internet-enabled DVD players now that can stream Netflix. We have remote controls on our smartphones rather than the actual hardware. Some of us are putting in lighting systems and door locks and things like that, even sprinkler systems that work with sensors and have connectivity with other devices or to the internet to enable these kinds of capabilities.
How are these sensors powered? Are they battery powered or are they plugged in?
Well, it's both. I mean, obviously, if you have a piece of equipment, it can be plugged in and it receives electrical current. But there are also a lot of them using batteries or RFID tags. Some of them are passive RFID that don't really use any current. They just conduct. And so it really depends on the application and what somebody is attempting to do with the equipment, but it can be either or both.
How do they transmit that data to somewhere that's useful?
A lot of this has to do with wireless technologies, and it can involve Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. It can also include protocols like Zigbee that have been developed specifically for devices. There's a whole array of protocols and technologies that are used, but essentially it's the use of wireless technology, which I wouldn't say is always the case, but the mobile revolution is what has really allowed this to take place. The ability to get data from any place to any place instantaneously.
What were some of the more unusual sensors that you came across?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think there's just so many different things going on with these sensors, and some of the more creative ways that sensors are being used in the Internet of Things. For example, there's a football helmet now that when somebody gets tackled, if it hits a certain threshold, it will register and immediately send a notification to a smartphone or to somebody monitoring. And so what that enables is to detect a concussion or what might be a concussion. Somebody, obviously a doctor, needs to check that, or someone else. But things like that, I mean, those are pretty cool, to think about that you're able to monitor a situation like that a lot more effectively. So that might be one that's more unusual. But these sensors are winding up now in clothes. They're winding up all over the place and all sorts of things. And I think the thing that's interesting is a lot of junky applications. This is just kind of the natural technology curve. A lot of stuff that really is junky and useless and will disappear very soon. But there's a lot of great stuff taking place, particularly in healthcare, medicine, transportation, things like that. I mean, we may, within a few years, have a level of connectivity across cars or parking structures, places like that, where we're able to drive to a parking structure and the car can find a spot. Then we would, through the Internet of Things, also pay for the actual time we've used rather than having to put in $5 or $10 a flat fee that probably is more than what we're going to use. So then when we leave, there might be a notification that we're leaving and someone else has that spot available. There are a number of parking apps now. They're not, I would say, highly sophisticated, but these types of technologies are evolving very rapidly. And that's just, one or two examples of what's possible.
What type of sensors would they put in clothing?
Well, I mean, there's all sorts of things in clothing. It could be anything from fitness bands to track heart rate. For, let's say, if you're a runner, you might go out and it would measure your perspiration level, your heart rate level, things like that, and let you know maybe when it's time to take some water, or if your heart rate's getting too high, or if you're in your heart rate zone. There's a lot of talk right now about embedding sensors in clothing. That could also be used by emergency crews. If they, let's say, go into a building and there's a toxic chemical, perhaps their clothing would turn a certain color, or the sensor would alert someone that there's a problem instantly, that it's detecting some type of chemical or something like that. So there are a lot of uses. A lot of this is kind of being explored at the moment.
What sensor do you think might be the most useful for the common person?
Well, I mean, I that's hard to say because everybody's so different. Like I said, I've got a Fitbit wristband, and I find it extremely useful because it tracks my activity level. It hits the internet. It uses different applications. It's got its own app on my iPhone, and it also hits my Fitness Pal, which is another app. Put in my food, which I can scan with my iPhone using the barcodes, or manually enter the name of a product, and it hits a database and puts in the calories and all the nutritional information. All that comes together, and it shows how I'm doing every day, and whether I'm under or over my caloric intake goal or my nutritional goal or whatever that is. And so I think that's valuable. I think that there are a lot of other uses for these things. I have in my house an internet enabled front porch light. So, for example, that will automatically download the data from the internet about what the sunset is every day and turn on at sunset, and then it goes off at 11:30 at night. I can turn the lights off and on from the phone or from a remote location if I choose. I have a garage door that works the same way. So, there's locks, there's things like that. And so I think it really depends. This home automation area is taking off. And I think, Apple is going to be driving this forward with its framework for all of this. They're supporting this. A number of others that are supporting this. So I think home automation is going to take off in a pretty big way in a few years. It's starting to now where we're seeing all these products.
Can you describe your garage door device a little more? Sounds like something that I need.
Well, the garage door, every time it opens or closes, I get a notification on my smartphone. So let's say my kids leave the garage door open. I get an alert after 30 minutes. I could set it for 15 minutes. So if I'm not home and I see the garage door is open, I can close the garage door from wherever I'm at. I mean, it could be across town. It could be somewhere on the other side of the world. So if someone needed to get in, for example, I could open the garage door manually. Or if I have internet-enabled key locks, you can issue temporary codes or open or close those doors, just by pressing a button.
With these sensors everywhere, will stolen property become a thing of the past?
Well, I think, you're getting into an area that's really interesting, and that is, in a sense, security. And I do think that while the Internet of Things can help track devices or objects, and it may reduce some types of crime, it could also lead to increases in other types of crime. One of the things that I write about in the book, and is a little bit scary, is the use of this technology in new and creative ways for bad purposes, which could include using small drones or nanobots, things like that, to commit murder or assassinations, or using them for terrorist type activities. We're looking at the internet right now, and I don't think anybody would argue it's a mess with breaches and stolen data. Maybe we're seeing, I think in most places, I'm not saying everywhere, there have been decreases in crime, physical crime, over the last 25, 30 years, but we're seeing a huge spike in cyber crime. And it's getting to be at an almost epidemic proportion. So technology is neither good nor bad, it's how people use it. But the technology will enable more powerful ways to commit crimes, to steal things. And I never underestimate the minds of criminals to think up new and creative ways to steal things. So I'm not really sure, what's going to happen. I mean, I don't think any of us has a crystal ball, but I think there's reason for concern with technology and the way it's emerging. We really need to think about a framework for security and protecting data, particularly because if data is stolen from, a company that's, let's say, developing a product that for whatever, Microsoft or Apple or whatever, and let's say a foreign government gets it, they can go ahead and obviously have a very strong advantage that undermines the economic capabilities of the company doing the inventing. And we're already seeing these bugs planted in industrial systems. There was the Stuxnet virus, and that involved Iran and their development of a nuclear reactor. And now the U.S. has found malware in key systems, and we're starting to see more and more of this. So I think we really need to think through these things and not just toss everything out there and just see what sticks and what doesn't.
Will we just get used to being surrounded by sensors everywhere?
Yeah, I mean, there's just an enormous proliferation of these sensors. They're probably going to be everywhere and used for all sorts of things. I could go through all kinds of futuristic scenarios with you, but it's not out of the realm of possibility that you will be connected to the internet and the Internet of Things almost constantly through the day. Although, as we get way deeper into that, it just becomes more normal. We don't always think we're connected to our telephone, or we just think of it as a telephone. We don't think of it as some amazing technology nowadays, right? But when it was first invented I think it was the 1920s, well, when it first became commercially used in the 1920s, it was invented before that. It was pretty spectacular to have a telephone, or the first people who had mobile phones. So this is a little different. It's not just one item, it's a whole array of things. But I think we're going to see this filter into our life in many, many ways. I mean, I've touched on a number of areas, but lots and lots of possibilities in terms of how we buy things, how we go about our daily life, how our houses operate, businesses, automobiles. Further out into the future, we may have a network of self-driving autonomous vehicles. I mean, Google has already developed a vehicle that can drive without any human oversight, and it doesn't crash. I mean, it has not had a collision, as far as I understand. It had one, and it was due to someone else hitting the car, not any fault of the vehicle. So, we're heading more and more towards these highly automated systems, which I think will provide a lot of benefits. But again, there are risks associated with that too. If someone disrupts the network, or if terrorists are able to hack into it. So I think we really have to approach all of these areas very carefully.
What will we do with this data overload? Do we all need to become data scientists? I had a Fitbit for a while, but I just stopped checking it.
Well, I think that's a good question. I think that will play out over time. I wonder sometimes the same thing that you're asking, because we keep becoming inundated with more and more information and knowledge. A lot of these systems like home automation, I don't think really the consumer needs to worry about anything, because they're going to just be where you walk into a room and the lights turn on or off, or that you use a certain motion or gesture to override that, or a beacon, which is a little device that can track where you're at, or when you're in a room, will be set with certain rules. So I think a lot of that will happen automatically. We're already seeing that. There really isn't a need for a lot of consumer intervention or personal intervention in a lot of these. I mean, like your Fitbit, it's whether you want to read the data. I mean, it gathers the data. You don't have to go through the algorithms or put it into a spreadsheet and analyze all of that. It just gives you a readout. Now, you can take that data and do what you want with it, but it's there. So a lot of these things happen automatically. But I think the thing is that it's a good question you're asking, because, for example, in a larger sense with businesses and governments and society, what are we going to do with all this data? It's an enormous amount of data, and it really requires people to understand what it means, especially if we're going to use it in significant ways in medicine, agriculture, and areas like that. So we're seeing the emergence of data scientists and others who really understand data in a far deeper and broader way than what's occurred in the past. And I think that we're going to see more and more focus on data, but these systems have to be able to process and do things on the back end and not just dump a lot of data on people's laps, obviously, because most of us are not equipped to deal with that. And even those who are, there's just going to be too much data coming in. It really requires coordinating the right data points.
In your opinion, which of these sensors have the most potential to change the world?
Well, I think, when you look at smartphones, that's probably the nexus point for all of this. And when Apple introduced the iPhone, I think it was in 2007, if I recall correctly, that was sort of a game changer, because it put all these different sensors. And since then, they've only expanded, but there are a lot of sensors in these phones now, and there probably will be a lot more in the future. And they're able to do a lot of things that replace a lot of different devices. And when you start to combine sensors like that, it's not a 1 + 1 = 2 equation. In some cases, it's a 1 + 1 = 10 equation. It starts to exponentially increase the possibilities. So I think the smartphones are critical. I do think that RFID technology has been critical with this. That is the ability to put active and passive tags on devices. These are being used now extensively in the business world and in manufacturing and healthcare and other places. Radically changes the ability to know where things are at, how things are being used, the time and motion between different events. And when you start to understand all that, you can start to design far more efficient work processes, business processes, things like that. So, yeah, I think that RFID, I would say, is critical with this, the smartphones. And like I said before, the wireless technologies have enabled this. They've really allowed these capabilities to take place because to have an Internet of Things, you have to have data moving in real time. And to have data moving in real time, you have to have mobility, and you have to have cloud-type computing systems that are highly elastic and highly flexible.
Your book, The Internet of Things, comes out soon. Where can people find it?
Well, the book should be out by the end of the month, this being March. I think it's slated for March 27th. And it's available at Amazon, and I'm sure all the usual suspects. So, just, I guess, keep your eyes out. I think it's an interesting book because it doesn't delve into the technicalities of this too much. It's more of a primer for the Internet of Things, really understanding what it is, how it works, and looking at how it may play out over the next 10 to 20 years.
How can people follow what you're doing, Sam?
Well, I have a website, www.greengard.com. And it's Greengard. So that's one starting point. Twitter, I'm Sam the Writer. Like I said, I write for Baseline, CIO Insight. I've got articles online all the time.
Now that your book is coming out, what are you excited about next?
Well, actually, I write a lot of articles on this topic. I'm writing an article right now for one of the business publications about smart devices. So I do cover this area, and it is evolving and changing rapidly. I just think it's an interesting area. I think, from a technology standpoint, it's really cool what we're able to do nowadays. And some of these capabilities are just amazing. And in medicine, we're going to see the nexus of 3D printing and the Internet of Things and a number of other areas where we can probably dive further into amazing levels of medical care that weren't possible in the past, or putting sensors in our bodies and knowing when there's a problem far earlier than in the past. So I think all of that's really exciting.
Thank you, Sam, for spending your time on Exponential Outlook. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Exponential Outlook podcast. The show notes for this episode and a link to Sam's book can be found at exponentialoutlook.com. Please stay tuned for more interviews about exponential technology.